A cold coming. Death in the dormant vaults. Some puritanical reflections. Hunting the recidivist Murdin Iclone, I came to hubris in the dormant of 240 M41, as the imperial sidereal calendar has it. Dormant lasted 11 months of hubris's 29-month lunar year, and the only signs of life were the custodians with their lighted poles and heat gowns, patrolling the precincts of the hibernation tombs. Within those sulking basalt and ceramite vaults, the grandees of hubris slept, dreaming in crypts of aching ice, awaiting thaw, the middle season between dormant and vital. Even the air was frigid. Frost encrusted the tombs, and a thick cake of ice covered the featureless land. Above, star patterns twinkled in the curious, permanent night. One of them was Hubris's sun, so far away now. Come thaw, Hubris would spin into the warm embrace of its star again. Then it would become a blazing globe. Now it was just a fuzz of light. As my gun cutter set down on the landing cross at Tomb Point, I had pulled on an internally heated bodyskin and swathes of sturdy, insulated foul-weather gear, but still the perilous cold cut through me now. My eyes watered, and the tears froze on my lashes and cheeks. I remembered the details of the cultural brief my savant had prepared, and quickly lowered my frost visor, trembling as warm air began to circulate under the plastic mask. Custodians, alerted to my arrival by astropathic hails, stood waiting for me at the base of the landing cross. Their lighted poles dipped in obeisance in the frozen night, and the air steamed with the heat that bled from their cloaks. I nodded to them, showing their leader my badge of office. An ice car awaited, a rust-coloured arrowhead 20 meters long, mounted on ski-blade runners and spiked tracks. It carried me away from the landing cross, and I left the winking signal lights and the serrated dagger shape of my gun-cutter behind in the perpetual winter night. The spiked tracks kicked up blizzards of rime behind us. Ahead, despite the lamps, the landscape was black and impenetrable. I rode with Loris Vibben and 3 custodians in a cabin lit only by the amber glow of the craft's control panel. Heating vents recessed in the leather seats breathed out warm, stale air. A custodian handed back a data slate to Vibben. She looked at it cursorily and passed it on to me. I realized my frost visor was still down. I raised it and began to search my pockets for my eyeglasses. With a smile, Vibben produced them from within her own swaddled, insulated garb. I nodded thanks, put them on my nose, and began to read. I was just calling up the last plates of text when the ice car halted. "Processional 212, announced one of the custodians. We dismounted, sliding our visors down into place. Jewels of frost flakes fluttered in the blackness around us, sparkling as they crossed through the ice car's lamp beams. I've heard of bitter cold. Emperor grace me, I never feel it again. Biting, crippling, actually bitter to taste on the tongue. Every joint in my frame protested and creaked. My hands and my mind were numb. That was not good. Processional 212 was a hibernation tomb at the west end of the great Imperial Avenue. It housed 12,142 members of the hubris ruling elite. We approached the great monument, crunching up the black, frost-coated steps. I halted. "Where are the tomb's custodians?" "Making their rounds," I was told. I glanced at Vibben and shook my head. She slid her hand into her fur-edged robes. "Knowing we approach," I urged, addressing the custodian again. "Knowing we expect to meet them." "I will check," said the custodian, the one who had circulated the slate. He pushed on up the steps, the phosphor light on his pole bobbing. The other 2 seemed ill at ease. I beckoned to Vibben, so she would follow me up after the leader. We found him on a lower terrace, gazing at the strewn bodies of 4 custodians, their light poles fizzling out around them. "How?" he stammered. "Stay back," Vibben told him, and drew her weapon. Its tiny amber armed rune glowed in the darkness. I took out my blade, igniting it. It hummed. The south entry of the tombs was open. Shafts of golden light shone out. All my fears were rapidly being confirmed. We entered, Vibben sweeping the place from side to side with her handgun. The hall was narrow and high, lit by chemical glow globes. Intruding frost was beginning to mark the polished basalt walls. A few meters inside, another custodian lay dead in a stiffening mirror of blood. We stepped over him. To each side, hallways opened up, admitting us to the hibernation stacks. In every direction, rows and rows of ice berths ranged down the smoothed basalt chambers. It was like walking into the Imperium's grandest morgue. Vibben swept soundlessly to the right, and I went left. I admit I was excited by now, eager to close and conclude a business that had lasted 6 years. Iclone had evaded me for 6 whole years. I studied his methods every day and dreamed of him every night. Now I could smell him. I raised my visor. Water was pattering from the roof. Thaw water. It was growing warmer in here. In their ice berths, some of the dim figures were stirring. Too early. Far too early. Iclone's first man came at me from the west as I crossed a trunk-junction corridor. I spun, the power sword in my hand, and cut through his neck before his ice axe could land. The second came from the south, the third from the east, and then more. More. A blur. As I fought, I heard furious shooting from the vaults away to my right. Vibben was in trouble. I could hear her over the Vox link in our hoods. "Eisenhorn! Eisenhorn!" I wheeled and cut. My opponents were all dressed in heat gowns and carried ice tools that made proficient weapons. Their eyes were dark and unforthcoming. Though they were fast, there was something in them that suggested they were doing this mindlessly, by order. The power sword, an antique and graceful weapon, blessed by the Provost of Inks himself, spun in my hand. With 5 abrupt moves I made corpses out of them and left their blood vapour drifting in the air. "Eisenhorn!" I turned and ran. I splashed heavily down a corridor sluiced with meltwater. More shots from ahead. A sucking cry. I found Vibben face down across a freezer tube, frozen blood gluing her to the sub-zero plastic. 8 of Iclone's servants lay sprawled around her. Her weapon lay just out of reach of her clawing hand, the spent cell ejected from the grip. I am 42 standard years old, in my prime by Imperial standards, young by those of the Inquisition. All my life I have had a reputation for being cold, unfeeling. Some have called me heartless, ruthless, even cruel. I am not. I am not beyond emotional response or compassion. But I possess, and my masters count this as perhaps my paramount virtue, a singular force of will. Throughout my career it has served me well to draw on this facility and steel myself, unflinching, at all that this wretched galaxy can throw at me. To feel pain or fear or grief is to allow myself a luxury I cannot afford. Loris Vibben had served with me for 5.5 years. In that period she had saved my life twice. She saw herself as my aide and my bodyguard, yet, in truth, she was more a companion and a fellow warrior. When I recruited her from the clan slums of Tornish, it was for her combat skills and brutal vigour, but I came to value her just as much for her sharp mind, soft wit, and clear head. I stared down at her body for a moment. I believe I may have uttered her name.